Hi, nerds. We're going to look at some comics. And so, to understand the comics we're going to look at, you need to understand some of the stuff. So, here's a D&D book, right? This was a controversial one back in the day. Ravenloft. If you've heard anything about D&D, you've heard about Ravenloft and vampires. Dark Sun was a setting of heat. Conan, right? They did a game. And Marvel Superheroes, which was my favorite game as a kid. So I've hinted at this before, and I've warned you. We're going to start doing more toy stuff and more Dungeons and Dragons stuff. A little more broad, vintage goods and collectibles and action figures and books and that sort of thing. But obviously our focus will still be comic books. And so these comic books that we're looking at, I showed you this stuff, it'll make sense. Well, let's go ahead and look at them. All right, so this is what I was talking about, Dungeons and Dragons comic books. So these were from DC Comics in partnership with TSR, which was the creators of the company formed when Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and the gaming crews in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and the Twin Cities collaborated together to form Dungeons and Dragons. And then you may not know the story. They created the company TSR. It was based on Gary Gygax's chainmail rules, which was already he had already been distributing. And then Dave Arneson essentially came up with the idea for role playing, and he introduced the characterization and role playing largely was his idea that was introduced to wargaming, which was the tradition until then. Dave Arneson infamously was horrible at delivering, and so it was hard for him to put ideas to paper. So there is very little of his published work published before his death. Gygax was a machine, was also a showman, so very much the Stan Lee-esque idea where it was a co-creation, but Stan Lee as the showman and the workhorse, and Gygax in a similar vein, although those are two different situations. They had that similarity. Gygax was a showman and a workhorse. So Gygax is most remembered for the creator of Dungeons and Dragons. Then it became Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in the early 80s, and this is where the comics came, licensed with DC. Now, I am a Dungeons and Dragons nerd, yet I have never read these comics, surprisingly, just because, you know, where would I have no idea where I would read them digitally, and I didn't have them in my collection, so now I'm starting to collect them. You'll see issue number 1, 2, here is 3. You know, the arts, you're probably not the best, and I don't know that was their A team at the time. Before, these were a licensed product, and it's not like where G.I. Joe, where no one wanted to do G.I. Joe, and they assigned it to Larry Hama, and who thought it was a kiss of death for his career, but it turned out he was a legend. This didn't have that same type. Here's number 6. But, you know, I haven't heard anything where they are, they're embarrassingly bad. I think they were just fine comics that I somehow missed, and at some point I want to go back and read those. Here's number 8. I don't know anything about the characters other than, you can kind of recognize the archetypes, right? There's your dwarf, and probably here's your fighter, and it looks like a sorceress. And I think, at this time, Dungeons and Dragons were just wildly popular, as it is now. We had our major movie. Oh, and look at this. This is by Jeff Grubb, who was a big name in the creation of Dungeons and Dragons. So that is good to see that level of talent in the writing. Here's number 12. Now look here. Missing number 13 goes to 14. So you see when I'm collecting, and this, if you watched my previous video with some of the IPs, like where I'm actively collecting like some Shogun Warrior comics and things like that, Mask comics, I'm actively collecting these, which is strange for me because I have so many comics. There's very few. So it's kind of remarkable that I would not have runs of some of the IPs that, are deepest in my heart. but I don't, and so I'm going to try to remedy that. But I'm being very patient. I'm not going out and buying them issue by issue on eBay, because I'm not a fool. I'm just waiting to where I can pick them up kind of organically, either through collections or, you know, just going to shops and buying them individually. So you go see, it's already at issue 21, 22. We see a big dragon. That's nice. And again, you see some of the archetypes, you know, the dwarf, and you see probably like a barbarian fighter or something like that. I haven't seen a paladin yet. I haven't seen anything like a dritzt, like a drow. So that was 24. This goes to 27. So it at least went to 27. Put in the comments if you know how far this run went, because again, I didn't get it as a kid, which is shocking for my love of DC. So I don't know how far the issues ran for, but I had a good run. Now I should say I got a lot of these in part due to my buddy Chris, and my buddy Chris at North Garden Comics. That's a comic channel on YouTube that you should check out. So my buddy Chris had some of these, and that he had found in dollar bins, and gave them to me for a good deal, and I was very thankful for that, and kind of helped boost and kickstart. And then I got a few others in a collection. So between those two sources, I was able to get several of those. And I wanted to say the first, you know, the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons series, but this is Dragonlance. Now, a lot of people remember Dragonlance as a famous setting within Dungeons and Dragons, the Dragonlance setting. The books are famous. There's probably 100 of them. Tracy Hickman, Margaret Weiss, and obviously I don't know if this imprint, if the Dragonlance setting was being released at the same time Advanced Dungeons and Dragons main title, or how that works. So if you know anything about it, any background, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect them and learn as I go. So it'll be part educational for me as well. So here's 1, 15, 28. I'm not doing so great there, right? So obviously I have some work to do there. What's next is Spelljammer, which is another setting within Dungeons and Dragons, and this is essentially Dungeons and Dragons in space. Is a simplified way to think about Spelljammer. The Starjammers were famous with Chris Claremont, X-Men at the time, but here is Spelljammer as a setting within Dungeons and Dragons. And again, it's still DC Comics, TSR, the makers of Dungeons and Dragons. D&D was super popular at this time, buoyed in part by just It's Awesome, and then also the Satanic Panic. Now, if you're talking about settings within Dungeons and Dragons, the most famous is the Forgotten Realms. A lot of people know the Forgotten Realms and associate that as, I don't want to say it's the default setting, but for many folks it in practice is, right? Because the Forgotten Realms contains major cities like Waterdeep, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter, right? So these games that appear in video games, highly popular video games, the books, Dritzt, the famous drow, maybe the most famous character of all from Dungeons and Dragons, was in the Forgotten Realms setting. So the Forgotten Realms is a setting within Dungeons and Dragons as a whole. And so look at that. There was a imprint. Here's issue number 1, number 4, number 5. Look at the gaps, but clearly I need to collect these. So 12 and 15, and obviously in today's, you would never make it to issue 15. You would have been canceled and rebooted 12 times within 15 issues. But then you have 16, 17, I'm getting a little bit of a run. Here we go. 18, 19. Now I do not know which characters, you know, would appear here. 20 and 21. And that concludes our look at Dungeons and Dragons comic books. All right, I hope you like Dungeons and Dragons and comic books, and those two together like peanut butter and chocolate, because if you didn't like that, that was 8 minutes of your life you'll never get back. But I appreciate you going along with me. Like I said, it is bizarre that I did not collect these as a kid. I think I just, you know, back before the internet, you just often weren't wear, right? And so if you didn't spot it at your drugstore spinner rack and you didn't have a buddy who bought it where you could trade with, you just didn't know, right? And so I was a Marvel zombie at the time, even though I was definitely a D&D geek. I was a Marvel zombie in terms of comics, and so I think I just missed these. And then, you know, as I grew older, and like I said, my buddy Chris from North Garden Comics channel, he hooked me up with a few. I bought a few in a collection, and suddenly I had a kickstart on a collection of D&D comics, and I thought, what the heck, why don't I finish this run? And so I'm actively collecting these, trying to finish a run, which is rare for me, as I'm trying to downsize my comic collection a little bit because I have too many. But I'm still buying D&D, I'm still buying toys, and so I hope to work some of those loves into these videos a bit more, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more, subscribe. I think the next one might be some more comics, but soon we'll get to some D&D books and box sets and some toys. All right, take care. Bye.